Welcome back for part 3. I'm John Kraft.
Erica Fernhaber.
Kirk Allen, Edgar County Watchdogs. This is our part 3 of a multi-part series on the state police reports and their investigation of the Shelby County Sheriff's Office. And I think this one's probably going to have a whole lot more highlights and questions of malfeasance that the state police completely ignored. This interview with Sheriff Kuntz began at 11:02. And that was conducted on the 14th of May in 2020. Where'd they hold this interview at, John?
In his office.
Wonder why they never call anybody into those little, small white rooms with a one-way mirror and shining lights and a couple investigators. I wonder if they read his Miranda rights to him. No, they met him on his turf. And maybe they have a tactic for that. I mean, maybe they think that's going to help them in some way. But what was amazing right off the bat, when Kuntz took office, he placed Under Sheriff Robert McCall in charge of timekeeping responsibilities and submitting payroll for the entire sheriff's department.
So he threw him under the bus.
That's McCall's fault. It's not my fault. It's typical deflection. He's the sheriff. He's the one responsible. Kuntz advised Shelby County Sheriff's Office employees are required to fill out timesheets. There you go, case closed. They're required to fill out timesheets.
Well, you were told they don't have final timesheets.
They didn't produce any. They produced the CAD time in out and said that was their timesheet. But
the log in, log out.
prior to May 15th of 2020, absolutely no timesheets.
So it wasn't until after the FOIAs that they started doing anything.
And then they go to McCall. McCall submits them to the county clerk.
Which contradicts what McCall said in the interview right after this, that said they go to Bob, to Tina, to McCall, to the treasurer's office.
Oh, so they got their stories conflicted? I guess they didn't talk because their interviews were on different days, so maybe they just didn't make that connection. But surely they would. No, I won't say that. I'm not going to.
And he mentions once again that the employees are salaried and not paid hourly, which conflicts.
He doesn't know because he didn't read the contract.
Yeah, that conflicts with the contract.
Right.
Yeah, they're paid hourly.
And here, I just read this just now. Kuntz said after he arrived, the employees changed from 8-hour shifts to 10-hour shifts. Who changed?
He changed it, not the
He changed the employee shift. The employees didn't change their shift.
Right.
But he says 10-hour shifts, 4 days on, 4 days off, but Gina had said 5 days on, 3 days off.
Right. After a FOIA request was submitted by the Edgar County Watchdogs and Shelby County Treasurer, it was learned the shift and hour change resulted in employees occasionally working only 30 hours in a week. Where's the follow-up question from the state police? Were they paid for 30 hours? Or were they paid for 40? There was no follow-up. The answer is they were paid for 40. How do we know they were paid for 40? We brought the treasurer to answer those questions. She's cutting the checks. They were paid for 40?
They were paid for 40 and then some.
Although Kuntz doesn't believe the occasional 70-hour pay period violates the contract. It wasn't a 70-hour pay period. They might have worked 70, but they got paid for 80, right?
Right.
But had he read the contract said shall work 5 8-hour shifts.
But it wouldn't have violated the contract with only 70 hours because they're still getting paid for 80.
Right.
The contract was for 80.
But there's no follow-up from the state police. Even if he says, okay, you can work 70, why are you paying them for 80? And how is it if they're keeping timesheets, they're required to fill out a timesheet? If that's the case, how do you overpay these people? There's not a single follow-up question there from the state police. Kuntz provided a copy of the new employee timesheet. Now this is on page 1 of this multi-page document. A copy of the new employee timesheet. Now does that mean a timesheet for new employees? Or is that a new employee timesheet? As in everybody has a new timesheet. That's what's new. The timesheet is found several pages into it, page 4. Was he turning these in?
No, that was the newly implemented timesheet with the payroll policy that was passed in the county that was to take place May 15th of 2020.
So after they got caught, well, after they realized, after the FOIA request, they implemented timesheet.
Well, we
So-
did countywide because after we got
They
caught, the
told
board
the state
finally.
police they implemented the timesheet, but then never actually implemented it.
Well, it wasn't.
They just showed him a copy of the new timesheet.
Well, she's getting them now. She's getting them now, but back to that first paragraph, your second paragraph in here, it says they're required to fill out a timesheet. Okay, Mr. Koontz, were they required to fill out a timesheet before or after the FOIA request? And this is a case where a simple FOIA request from two different sources results in two different sets of documents, but it literally stopped hundreds of thousands of dollars in malfeasance. Safe statement?
Yes.
So for people that complain about FOIA, this one saved the taxpayers an arm and a leg. And the state police completely failed in this whole process by failing to ask the questions. When were they filling out this timesheet? Not knowing the details that we do, for all they know, it's been going on with that new timesheet all along. Overtime is computed on a daily basis, therefore any hours worked in excess of an employee's 10-hour shift is eligible for overtime. Is that true?
That's not in the language of the contract and no.
Wait a minute, we're following the contract.
No. And there was never
You said
a
we were.
memorandum of understanding to allow the 10-hour shift, which becomes a part of the underpayment that was reported in the forensic audit. There's a whole lot there.
If you work over 8 hours, you're supposed to have, you're right. What was it you said about him reading the contract?
He never read it.
He never read it.
If you're a salary employee, why do you get overtime?
Right, yeah, great, wait, you're not supposed to ask that question. We saw that question here from the state police, right? I'm sorry, I digress. Employees received other time earned, vacation, sick, and comp time. Well,
In
sick-
accordance with the contract, that is not true.
And they don't track that. Remember McCall said they don't track sick and
Well, they were
personal time.
tracking it, that or they created documents after the fact, but
No,
they
that
were
would
tracking
never
it.
happen.
It was never turned into the treasurer's office to be tracked by anyone other than them, but it was not according to the contract.
Employees are not allowed to go into the negatives with sick or vacation time.
It happened multiple times.
I think the forensic auditor pointed that out, didn't he?
He did.
So that would be a statement, if that's what they told the state police, that would be a false statement to law enforcement.
That would be.
How about, did the ISP says, do you have any evidence to support what you're saying? Did they come, they came back and asked you for that, right?
No,
Really?
no.
Interesting. Per contract, vacation time is able to be cashed out and employees receive time for holidays even when they're off. Boy, they definitely played the vacation time. They were giving it to everybody on January 1, even though they weren't entitled to it. Anything you'd like to expand on that problem?
Well, same with the sick time. And we would have employees, go out. And when you're awarded all your vacation January 1 instead of per service, month of service, and again, that gets reported to IMRF for pension purposes.
On into the gun sales part of the investigation, the state police reported that Koontz told McCall, the undersheriff, to do whatever Vonderheide said. That's not what Koontz told us when we interviewed him. He didn't say that McCall talked to Vonderheide. He said he did. So who really talked to Vonderheide? Because she seems to not recall the conversation. But Koontz, again, puts it on McCall to do whatever Vonderheide said.
I like that. After the firearms were sold, Coons stated it was determined the firearms were technically not allowed to be sold. Really? That's not a technical violation.
I haven't found that term in any of our statutes.
It's like saying, Your Honor, your officer, I was technically exceeding the speed limit, so that means it's not worthy of a ticket.
Right.
It's only technicality.
He knew it was wrong when he couldn't find the paperwork, parentheses, judge order. That's what we FOIA'd that triggered the whole thing, was a copy of the
They didn't know
order.
they needed one until we submitted for it.
Right, and that's pretty much what he said. And they never once talked to us about the stuff that we were told, because the inventory on this, never mind the math not adding up and the treasurer not having access to any of those finances. We went from here's the inventory that includes all guns sold and received or recovered, and then later on we find out that there were guns missing. And 2 years later, now all the guns have magically gotten back to home.
I might just add all of this went on before I was in office,
Yeah, these gun sales went on in 2018.
but these records were not run through under the prior treasurer either. There was no record keeping of it.
And I've got an outstanding FOIA on this issue. It says originally Kuntz included the $25 locked and loaded paperwork fee from the Shop with a Cop Fund reimbursement. So when the deputies brought their guns back and the employees, they had paid an FFL transfer fee. So they reimbursed them that fee, which the taxpayers shouldn't be reimbursing. Then he says Kuntz gave his own funds to the purchasers to reimburse the Shop with a Cop Fund. Well, I have FOIA'd the sheriff's office for the Shop with a Cop Fund for all reimbursements under that section. And I think what we're gonna find is there's been no reimbursements of those funds. I'll be shocked if there has been. So that would be another failure to follow up by the state police. So we'll follow that up to see if that turns out to be the case. That's my prediction.
Well, if we ever get the audit of those accounts, we may get an answer.
Well, here's another FOIA. You should FOIA the law enforcement committee for any proof that the committee chairman verified all the guns were accounted for. That's not the committee chairman's job.
Nope.
I doubt if he even went down there and looked in the evidence locker. Could have though.
I would be shocked. In fact, the current sheriff told me during the last meeting, he doesn't even have a key to the evidence locker. Because I asked, have you put eyes on these guns? And he says, no, I don't even have a key to it. And my comment was, that's probably a good thing. Because if he did have a key to it, chances are he could get wrapped up in what potentially was a massive cover-up to get all these guns back into the locker. Because this didn't all just happen overnight. This was a process that the paper trail says they got caught and they went out of their way to try to get the guns back. And supposedly they're all back now. Kuntz provided a copy of the Shop with the Cop's balance sheet. Well, that was a balance sheet that came out of your office, wasn't it?
Well, he gave a copy of the fund and the account. They're not the same thing. So it was misleading.
Okay. And but the state police called you and talked to you about that, right? They confirmed the document, the financial documents?
No.
They didn't?
No.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Positive.
I'm positive. I had very little conversation with them.
Where's the verification of any of this stuff? There's none. It says, Kuntz stated there was a pay and insurance issue that just went to arbitration and there's a final ruling. And within these documents is the arbitration ruling.
Which has nothing to do with either of these issues.
Which tells
Nothing.
me they sat in their office and they talked about law enforcement and they had a conversation of all the things that are going on in life. Oh, we've even got this grievance going on, and I'll send you a copy of it. We just got a final ruling. Everything's great, everything's fine. But it had nothing to do with the criminal investigation of what's happened here. The fact is, we know people got overpaid. We know there was malfeasance. Whether or not it rose to the level of criminality, we still don't know because there wasn't a proper investigation. You don't have to be a trained investigator to ask these questions. I think you've been asking them since day one and still have not gotten the responses, appropriate responses. This interview ended at 12:04. So they started at 11:02 and ended at 12:04.
They probably catered in some food or something for lunch.
It is absolutely amazing. Sheriff Kuntz resigned. We were in Florida when we got that resignation notice, and that was shortly after all this broke out. Well, that was June of 20, wasn't it?
Yes.
June of 20. He was interviewed May 14th.
Then he finds another job.
I don't know if he found another job.
Might have been June of 21.
Was it 21?
Yeah, because then McQueen was in 40 days
Yeah, it
and
was
Brian's
last year.
been in since.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a
Okay.
year later.
So he bit the bullet for a year. Interesting. But throughout these 3 interviews, state police have contacted you to follow up to verify anything at all?
There was an interview I met with them, after that, they provided some documentation and didn't ask to verify anything. They took for gospel what Tina Wade and Bob Zakowski said, even though the documentation clearly proved, and then they presented a memorandum that was created on May 8th, 2020 that said certain sergeants got pay in 2015, which was also a part of the forensic audit and that was the Shelby County special.
Yeah.
So they followed up with nothing.
Let's cover that one in the follow-up video we're gonna do.
Okay.
With that, I think we're done on the Sheriff Kuntz interview. Again, his started on page 1 of the 125 pages. We know there's more pages state police haven't given us, because originally they gave us a bunch of redacted pages, and that total was more than 125, so we're still in court trying to get the rest of those records, including the recordings, and we'll update accordingly. Stay tuned for part 4.